I think we're live. Hey, we are live, and hopefully
Woo.
Windows Update doesn't shut us down or there's thunderstorms coming. Hold off at least till we're done recording. Yes, folks, here it is once again, the spoiler room. And I have recovered from my weekend of trivia, and I am ready to continue our slaying month. Thank you so much for coming down the stairs, pulling up a chair, and popping your favorite drink, whether it be tea or whether it be not your father's alcohol root beer knockoff from Aldi, because that's the only thing that I can get now around here. Because
Is it not your stepfather's root beer?
no, it's original Big Brother hard root beer. So this is Big Brother's hard root beer because I can't get it, which would be the same as not your father's hard root beer. See how they play with that idea? It's still hard root beer.
You drink Big Brother watches you.
Yeah, sure. I don't care. They can watch me. Big Brother can watch me all they want. I don't need all these people that get all like, oh, they could see my stuff. I'm like, I don't care. They could see me scrolling through Facebook or watching, the latest indie horror film. I don't care.
Well,
Whatever.
that's an entirely different discussion.
That's a completely different.
I have the polar opposite opinion.
But we do have Big Brother Heart Root Beer, so they're at least keeping an eye on what I'm drinking, which is fine. Yes, folks, you heard those dulcet tones. My right-hand man, good friend, and guy who just keeps coming back. It is none other than Mr. Ian Simmons. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. I feel like death, but I'm here to talk about the undead.
Well, that's good because I'll bang a gong for you. We'll keep you hopping and moving. Yes, folks. As you can tell from the title, it was Slaying Month. We decided to go old school and go way back and look at a movie that has one of the original vampire slayers himself, Mr. Van Helsing, who is in something I would have never thought I would say in a Hammer Horror Shaw Brothers co-production film called The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. This is not something that I knew I needed in my life. I've not seen this film before, but upon watching it, I am like, why haven't I watched this before now? It's one of those things where why haven't I watched this before now?
I was in the same boat as you because I saw this for the first time in December of last year, only a few months ago, and I I went back and I listened to it for this show.
Oh, you did? Oh,
yes, because I watched it in December, and then I needed a bit of a refresher, so I listened to it today while I was working. Occasionally glancing over to watch the screen, and I remembered why I mostly didn't like it, but then I remembered why I loved it by the end. I think this is one of those movies that is redeemed by the action climax. Wow, but yeah, I'm with you. It's such a strange movie, and yeah.
I never thought I would. I didn't even, I feel bad that I didn't even realize. I've seen the movie on my list. It was always one of those where you scroll past and you're like, oh, that looks cool, but I'll come back to it. And I never came back to it. And, and now that I did come back and finally watch it for the show, I'm like, God, I wish I would have seen this sooner. This film is like, this is my bag. I'm like, but it is so surreal. And Mr. Ian Simmons, since you are so familiar with it and we're doing something a little different, please give the synopsis of this film.
I'm going to butcher it.
Well, that's okay.
So the high level points. Oh, wait, hold on a second. I got to clear something off of my screen.
Yeah, you shouldn't have your goat porn up while we're doing this.
No.
Oh.
It's a different kind of Black Phillip.
I believe that's the title of a film.
Yes. No. Sorry, I just got like this annoying. You're having like Windows updates. I just got an Apple software update thing pop up in the middle of
Ooh.
my screen, so I can no longer see myself.
Well, it
Uh,
is that's that time of the month, I guess, for Windows updates and such. So
ugh. But so I'll try and not be distracted by the fact that I can't admire my own self in my screen. Oh, there I am. Okay, so 1804 Transylvania, I think, is when this thing starts,
yes,
and there's a Chinese like merchant or something, or is going and looking for Dracula's tomb. That's what it is.
yes.
He discovers Dracula's tomb, wakes Dracula up. Dracula's grumpy, and he's like, "I can use you. Well, why are you here?" And he's like, "Well, my people need a leader or some nonsense." And Dracula's like, "Okay, I'll take your body." So Dracula transforms into this Chinese guy, and then cut to several years later. Professor Van Helsing is now
Yes.
lecturing in a college in Shanghai, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and he's got a son, which is weird. The idea of Peter Cushing getting it on.
Van Helsing, yeah, is kind of interesting.
Yeah, this it's a whole like chapter that they don't. I don't think they really explore in the Hammer films. But he's got a great. It's not like he's got like a little 12-year-old kid. He's got like his son is in his mid-20s, I guess.
Yeah.
And they're off in exotic places doing the college thing, the lecture thing. And they got embroiled in this legend of the seven golden vampires, which are these like seven demons with elaborate like metal face masks and putty like melting clay skin with the world's worst like
Decomposition. That's what they're
does not
going for.
account for the fact that they have these Halloween store fangs that just like these solid white fangs that hang off of their faces. Um, they find a posse who they need to find this village that's vanished to stop the vampires who have been kidnapping women, first ripping their tops off, because I think that's part of the quote unquote ritual.
Yeah, I noticed that. I'm like, before we kidnap you, we have to rip your top off.
Yeah.
Okay.
But these ladies are taken into this like crypt with these. It's like a chamber, and there's a central vat of boiling blood, and they're all tied down to these metal tables or something. But fights ensue. This posse that Van Helsing and his friend, and Van Helsing Jr., he finds this young traveling I don't like adventure lady. They all get together and kick vampire butt, but the vampires kick their butts back, and that's what I really liked about this movie. It's got one of the darkest climaxes of one of these kind of goofy vampire movies that I've seen. I'm like, wow, there's like 5 minutes out of this that redeems the rest of the hour 25 for me. But honestly, I was surprised, because you say Hammer vampire movie, Shaw Brothers, kind of kung fu film, it conjures up a way more exciting image in my head than what we actually got, because for as much fighting as there is, there's like 10 times more waiting around and like, oh, it's just over that ridge. I think we've discovered the barren plot of land that used to be something.
Well, that's the Hammer element. See, that's that Hammer element.
No, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I spent all of last year doing
you
a
did.
series on the show called Hammerland, where I went through the Dracula and Frankenstein Hammer films with Aaron Christensen of Horror 101 with Dr. AC. And they get to some really high heights, and even at their lowest lows, where the movies get very strange and kind of like wackadoo, they're never boring. This was the most bored I've been watching a Hammer vampire movie out of all of them.
Wow.
But I still have a special place in my heart, because as you mentioned, it is different.
It's and see, I dug it. I didn't find it boring at all. I found it fascinating, because I'm just watching this. It's like, you're like, okay, this opens like a Hammer film. I mean, you get the classic Dracula type setting. The only thing that would have made this film better for me, if it would have been our classic Dracula as well against Van Helsing, but I don't.
honestly, that did kind of set the tone of disappointment.
Oh, that it wasn't Christopher Lee, that it was
Yeah, I mean,
some.
especially because this is, he was Dracula in pretty much. There was the one. I'm struggling to remember the titles because the titles all
Mhm.
kind of run together. But at one point there is a Cushing Van Helsing Dracula film, if I have this right. But it's not Dracula; it's another vampire who's sort of a baron. But
Okay.
it wasn't someone else playing Dracula.
Oh,
It was
okay.
just a different vampire.
Sure, sure.
So the other ones, it's Christopher Lee playing Dracula, and there have been Dracula movies where he has literally been in a bunch of scenes and said nothing. In this movie, there are 2 scenes with Dracula, and he has like maybe 2 minutes worth of actual dialogue.
Yes.
I understand they couldn't get Christopher Lee back, but man, this guy, he looks like Hal Holbrook with like in drag, like with the world's worst heavy ruby red lipstick. It's nuts.
The makeup was not the makeup was not the best on it, that's for sure. Not sure what they were going for with that makeup for sure, because I was like, wow, little too much blush on your vampire there.
Especially because he hadn't had anything to drink in however many centuries.
Yeah, but we find out that Dracula in this opening scene can take over and actually take over someone's body, like totally morph into him after spinning around in some smoke.
Called the smoke turntable. That was pretty amazing.
The smoke turntable. So suddenly, okay, so now he is a Chinese gentleman, apparently a Chinese priest who is overseeing the other vampires that run this town, and he wants to bring them back to life, and he needed Dracula, and Dracula's like, you know what, I'm tired of this castle, I'm just going to go to China, and I'm going to use your body because I'm a little too I might stand out in China, but you know,
A little bit.
just a little bit. I'm not going to exactly be able to blend in with my wonderful looks. So, uh, so we get ye old Dracula heading to China, and then we get this wonderful title sequence, and then we go to China where we have Van Helsing with Peter Cushing, who's actually looking fairly spry for in this film for 74. He hasn't he's just a couple years away from flying the Death Star, so he's still fighting vampires before he goes off into the Death Star. But yeah, it's funny because you get this opening with this set with the castle settings and that, and then you get him at the giving a lecture, and suddenly I'm having like Stargate vibes and some other vibes that we've gotten where the guy's trying to present his wackadoo idea out there of that there's real vampires, and everybody goes, I respect you, but you're crazy, we're leaving. I mean, what surprised me, and maybe you could school me because you did a full year of covering this, which is why I'm glad wanted to do this show, even though you'd seen this already, is this is one of the first times I've seen to where when Van Helsing speaks, usually people listen. In this one, Van Helsing speaks, and they're like, yeah, you're crazy, we're out of here.
Well, it's funny because he's usually a character who is summoned.
Yeah.
We know this guy and we've got this problem, or
Yeah.
he's just happens to be passing through and he's like, oh, I can help, and people believe him because there's freaking evidence of vampires already.
Right.
It is odd to me that they would invite this guy out to lecture at a college or university or whatever, knowing what his shtick is. Like, are they going to fly him all this way out there and put him up if they think that he's ridiculous? I mean, and did they pitch it to him that way? Come out here so we can make fun of you and have our students turn their backs on you.
Well, either that or they invited him out with the idea because he is, an anthropologist actually by trade. that they thought he was going to talk about, things other than vampires. Maybe it was just come to hear Van Helsing speak. I mean, this is not like the age of the internet where they can look it up and going, oh, these were his last 5 lectures and he's all talking about vampire. Okay, no, maybe I'll skip this. They might have just had Van Helsing's coming to speak, and he is a noted academic as well. So they didn't quite expect him to start diving into, vampires are real, because those guys are saying, well, Dracula was a madman. And he's like, nah, he isn't a madman. Guy tried to bite me like a dozen times in a dozen different films. He's real.
Yeah, I feel like there's an actual movie there.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because of, there's so many people in this film in particular, and also like in Chinese culture, legend is very important.
Right.
So that when you have it as a plot point that like nobody believes this legend, it's like, so why is this one far-fetched?
Because he's a European, he's an outsider.
Yeah,
I mean,
but I'm saying there's a whole movie there of like him going there to like guest lecture, and then all of a sudden freaking vampirism breaks out or something. And
see, that's what I was kind of thinking, or they would be like, oh yeah, vampirism's been throughout our legends, but never really true evidence, not thinking that he's just completely walk out on him. But one guy didn't, but we'll get back to him later. And then there's this wonderful scene. Again, more Hammer elements in this. This is not necessarily Shaw approach. This whole dinner scene where we get introduced to our other characters that will be showing up, going along with this in the film, including, a crime lord, and like you said, Van Helsing has a son, and Miss Van Buren, a lady who's traveling by herself, which this is, her character was a surprise for a film like this in 1974 in a Shaw Brothers Hammer. I'm like, wow, here's a woman who is just not taking like any guff from any men, and she's just played it up, very independent woman. This was unusual, wasn't it, to see a character like this?
Well, and that's the thing is, I've been thinking about this lately. I don't think it was unusual. Because the more I go back and watch older films,
sure,
the more I see characters like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm starting to wonder if this whole narrative about like we haven't had strong independent women in movies is simply because we've got a generation of like 20 to 30-year-olds who grew up in an internet culture of being told that there haven't been these archetypes before, and so they just believe it, and they don't go back and watch anything that was around before them, because as we discussed, old movies are boring. So it's kind of like this whole thing where there's older people like us, frankly, who are like, what the hell are you talking about?
And there is evidence on the other ones as well. It might either be popular or wide release films, because as much as this was distributed by what was it, Universal that put this out, I think. Even though it was distributed by a studio and that, it's not like they were seeing characters like this quite as much in the wide release arena, possibly. I'm not sure if that's what they mean,
but here's the thing. We're also trying to apply modern day sensibilities to something that was like 40 and 50 years old.
Yeah, that's
so it might be unique to have a single well-read, well-traveled woman in a film like this. But it's almost as if the expectation is that every other portrayal of a woman in movies was the one who needed to be rescued. She wasn't quite bright. She was constantly playing second fiddle to the man. And those characters they tend to be pretty rare. Now, I know you can probably go and like, well, look at all the sex comedies. Well, that's a completely separate genre in its own set of problems. But
we've addressed this before. This is a genre film, though, too, which lends itself usually to presenting stronger female characters, historically than your regular drama, maybe, or your comedy, like you said, along that lines, because we even when we did, it came from the 50s. There were more stronger female characters in most of the sci-fi films we watched, especially them. If you watch them, there's a female scientist in there who is the equal and portrayed as an equal to the men, who never really is just the damsel in distress. She's as smart and on level with it. And you see that a lot more in sci-fi and the genre stuff than, say, maybe the drama of the time. And maybe that's it. I'm not sure, because I'm kind of tired of hearing myself say, "Well, it's a surprise," but you mentioned it. Now I think about more of the older films that I watch, and yeah, there were a lot of strong female characters, not strong for that era at least. Some for strong for even today's standards, but still, I just think maybe it's the popularity of the movie at the time.
Maybe it's just a weird thing, because this is just like a 6-hour show that we could do on this, but
Yeah, I know.
my whole thing is like, if the past in popular entertainment was really as dark and sexist and racist as it's being made out to be now, wouldn't film and pop culture geeks like you and I who are like bred on this stuff? It was like practically in our bloodstream coming up, because all we did was watch TV and movies and read comic books all day. Wouldn't we have very different attitudes about people than we do? I don't like all these independent women in movies nowadays. There's too much of them. I want to go back to the days when they were just being, topless and being saved.
Yeah.
No, you don't see that ever.
I don't know. And I know we're just focused on this, but I just found her character fascinating. It was surprising because when I saw her in the cast, and everything, I'm like, okay, she's going to be the dress wearing, and we see her in the beginning, the dress wearing damsel of sorts. But then you find out about her character, you're like, oh, and then you meet her even more, and it's just like, oh, she's pretty, this is a pretty strong woman. She don't take no guff from no guy. She's on her own. I mean, even later on when the brothers, the family, come and track down Van Helsing, say, yeah, you know what? You're right about vampires. We got a town full of them. Come help us. And he's like, oh, it's going to be an expensive expedition. And she's like, yeah, I'll fund it. I'm rich on one condition. And what I love about that scene is because we'll get the scene before this, but while we're on this character, what I love about that scene is Van Helsing, the way Cushing plays it is great, because he asks, once she says, well, I'll fund it, the minute he asks what the condition is, it's like he knows what she's going to say before he asks it. And it's just this little smirk that Cushing gets that makes Cushing so awesome.
Yeah, he is. And that's one of the reasons I was so glad to do that series last year is, I think before that, really, I'd only known Cushing from Star Wars.
Sure.
Which is a damn shame, because he was a hell of an actor. And the thing is, like, Hammer films, and that's why one of the reasons I dismissed them for my entire life up until last year, is I thought they were just old, dusty, fuddy-duddy knockoff horror movies.
Right.
But they are some of the best horror movies with really rich storytelling and amazing performances. Cushing, and to a lesser extent in the Dracula roles, but more so in other roles, Christopher Lee elevated this genre. You could put anybody down in front of one of these movies, even if you have to strap them down and say, watch this hour-and-a-half film, and then tell me you don't respect the people who put this together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so that's why I found the concept of this movie even more mind-boggling, because knowing the Shaw brothers, I'm like, Cushing's in a Shaw brothers film. I mean, with the Hammer horror, it was British exploitation, I guess. So it wasn't like it was very controlled, implied exploitation in most of the Hammer stuff.
Yeah, we're doing a series now called Son of Hammerland, where we're getting into the sort of the later period,
right?
And sort of the off-brand, like not Dracula and Frankenstein. So yeah, they're into the 70s. They started getting more risque to like make the films relevant. So you'd see like it's jaw dropping to see nudity in a Hammer film.
Mm-hmm.
But like 10 years ago or whatever, I was at a horror convention. I saw like this beautiful coffee table book. I should have bought it at the time. It was like the Women of Hammer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm flipping through it, and it was all like women in these, like the shortcut,
Yeah, bodices, the low cut
bodices and
bodices and
things.
all
I'm
that.
like,
Yeah.
wow, must be like naked women all over these movies. And I watch and like, no, it's not. That was the extent of it, just
That
like
was
really revealing kind of clothing, but tastefully done. And so
right.
it got to the point where we started seeing nudity in Hammer films, and I include this one.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of cheapens it. I'm like,
Mm.
you're better than this. Especially because it's China, because it's the 70s. And because of the way that a lot of this is done, as we mentioned before, it literally is marauders going through a village. A bunch of like young women come out of their homes, just like, what's going on? And this guy rides by on horseback, rips the top off,
Mm-hmm.
and there's several of these scenes, and it's just like these naked, Asian ladies. You get this feeling of like exoticism and
Yeah.
like a really kind of a gross exploitation. Not that there's such a thing as not gross exploitation in some sense, but in this case, it's like, I wonder what a naked Chinese lady looks like. Oh, now you got it, kids.
Yeah, well, actually, and even before that, because when they do the flashback about the farmer who stood up to one of the 7 golden vampires, which makes this title kind of misleading because there's not actually 7 gold. There's 7 golden vampires for about 3 minutes, and
It counts though.
It counts, I guess that does count. And then we have this farmer who went to rescue his lady from the vampires because she was one of the first, and this was a flashback in the past. And even in this scene, like half the lady, they've got all these women, the 7 tables for 7 vampires, kind of like that's the sequel to 7 brides for 7 brothers, is 7 tables for 7 vampires.
I'd watch
and
that.
like half of the women on these tables just have their shirts ripped off for whatever reason. I mean, it's just okay, it's a vampire film, you're gonna get nudity, and they're like, here you go. And he comes in and rescues one of them and kills one of the vampires with his own like medallion, which was pretty cool. Seeing this guy just kept smoking the whole time. I mean, it's like you can see exactly, okay, Shaw Brothers, Hammer, Shaw Brothers, Hammer, because you get the Hammer with the sets and the quiet spots and the dialogue and learning about Van Buren, Van Buren, her, and
Van Helsing, the president, was not in this movie.
Well, Buren, what Miss Buren, I forgot.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And Van Helsing, and and then all of a sudden you get this action set piece or two like inserted in between. So it's like you've got Van Helsing, he's giving his lecture, and then he does the flashback, and suddenly we get the Shaw Brothers. Uh-oh. Did I freeze up?
No, you're moving a little slow, but I can hear you.
Okay, cool. But you get the Shaw Brothers action scene in this flashback with the women on the table, and he comes in, and then there's some martial arts stuff, and he's fighting, and I'm like, oh cool, we're getting to the martial arts fighting, and you get this whole segment cutting a hole in a vampire, and he's smoking and all of this, and then we cut back to Van Helsing talking. I'm like, oh, Hammer. Okay. And then we've got the son and our woman traveling solo across the country, which every single guy around is like, oh, I don't think that's such a good idea. And she's like, fuck you, I'm my own person. Vanessa Buren. That's why I keep saying Van Buren. And then they get this wonderful action sequence where we get introduced to the Heisey brothers, the family who come in and just these crooks. Because what happened? Let me back up. Pardon me, folks. The prednisone is wearing off. That they have for my whatever. That's a long story. But
I always thought prednisone was like slang for a maternity ward.
No, that's it's prednisone, not pregnazone.
Oh, wow, I'm doubly corrected.
Yeah, yes, you probably are. Anyway, so Buren turns down the invitation by the crime lord basically to escort her home because she knows better. She better knows better. She's better, she's been traveling the world. She's used to this. So she's like, yeah, no. And then Van Helsing's son is like, no, I've already, been very chivalry. And so they're in their carts, and then she decides to walk, which was a mistake because then they get ambushed. And then we get this wonderful action sequence again, just this street fight, which was so much fun to watch. And then back to the talking, which is the hammer.
Yeah, I don't know.
I loved these fighters. These fighters are great. You got the twins with the swords. You got, their little sister with the daggers. And then you've got the most badass out of all of them. He must be the older brother, I think he was. All his other siblings have a weapon, either a bow or club or mace, excuse me. They're all silver weapons too, because they know they're fighting vampires. Double axe guy. You got twins with swords, his sister with daggers. Then you get the one guy fighting people with weapons barehanded. I loved this guy.
That's sort of my problem is that, I mean, it's the movie's just under an hour and a half long.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much talking and waiting around that could have been used to give us a sense of who these characters are, because they don't get a whole lot of screen time.
No,
they're introduced late, and they're dispatched early, relatively speaking.
He's mace person, he's axe person, they're sword people,
right? It's kind of like the Ninja Turtles. Reading the black and white comics, you're like, oh, that's the guy with the sword, and that's the guy with the the nunchucks or whatever. Right. It's not until they get to the TV show, like, oh, they've got different colored bandanas. They're not all just like red and. But yeah, that's the thing, is that's me applying my modern filmmaking sensibilities, because I feel like if you were to remake this movie today, you'd probably introduce the characters early, and you get little moments, more of a sense of who they are and kind of what they're doing in this group, other than like, this is my weapon and this is the way that I'm going to go out. Hell, even the Expendables had more character development in this movie.
They did have a lot of, the Expendables did have some more character development, but that didn't faze me though too much, because if you watch a lot of martial arts films, depending on if they're not necessarily the main person, you don't always get a whole lot of character development, because they want to get you to the action. So it's just like,
sure, but they're supposed to be a family, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that implies that we're supposed to care about the fact that they care about each other.
Yeah, well, that's what you got. They fight well together. I mean, they took on, literally, as they're leaving town on the expedition, an army of like 30 folks in this another wonderful action sequence that took a little while to get there, where these 8 folks take on like 30 guys. And I loved that. I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. And it was.
And that's the thing. It was good.
Yeah.
I appreciate the marrying of the two genres, but, and I haven't seen a whole lot of these kinds of, martial arts action movies. So maybe that's another genre I need to dip into at some point. But for me, a lot of this stuff is, I would rather watch the lecture on vampires than another bridge scene, because it feels so obligatory. It feels like a kill in a slasher movie. Oh, it's been 7 minutes. We need to murder somebody. This is like, it's been 5 minutes. We need to have a 10-minute scene of people like hi-ying and chopping and stabbing. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Is there a story buried in here somewhere? Because I still haven't found that fucking village. It's just a matter of, I guess, what I'm looking for. And this is not it.
I guess not. No, see, and for me, I've watched a number of martial arts films over the ages, especially when I was younger. Kung Fu theater at midnight or 11 o'clock on Friday nights or Saturday nights. So it was Kung Fu. No, Friday nights. Saturday nights was Elvira. Friday nights was Kung Fu theater. And so they used to play. I mean, they were heavily edited. I didn't realize them at the time. Martial arts films, but I watched a number of them. Most of them, I didn't quite remember what film they were. I just watched them because they had some they had action in it, and some wild action fights. And this one for me, yeah, no, it was fell right in line with that. This was, you know, I'm used to seeing some of this, and I just loved the crazy fight scenes when they got to them. And for me, I guess I wasn't looking for character development with it, because I had seen enough martial arts films to where, uh, unless they're the main characters, your development might be a little bit thin, because you're not exactly watching it for that. You've got to know enough of these characters, like this one. Here's what their specialties are. Here's their relationship to each other, and yeah, that's what you get for them. Uh,
Well, I think that's the uneasy marriage of Hammer and Shaw Brothers in this case,
right.
because you don't go to a Hammer film. You go to a Hammer film for a few things. One is
Hmm.
the the lore. The other is usually, especially earlier on, the production values, the costuming, the sets.
Right.
But it's mostly about the performance and the story.
Hmm.
The whole idea, because the vampire attacks and all this other stuff, they tend to be a very small proportion of the overall runtime.
Right.
So it's not, but in what I imagine to be a Shaw Brothers and a lot of these other kind of genre pictures that you're talking about, that sort of is the selling point.
Hmm.
So when I'm watching a Hammer film, yeah, I'm going to this because I want to see a Hammer movie. If they want to have this martial arts element, that's kind of cool, I guess, as an idea. But to me, it just kind of interrupted something I was more invested in.
Yeah, I can, and I can see that, and because yeah, that's why I found this marriage interesting between these two, because definitely different styles of approach to your characters, especially, and elements that you're not quite used to seeing mashed together. you know, and our caravan travels along quite a bit, and along the way, in a bit of a surprising twist, you think maybe at first they're going to lead towards the son, and something happening between the son and Buren, even though she's older, a little cougar, relationship going on there. Well, because it's implied at the beginning, the way kind of, because
Oh yeah.
he's staring at her, and all that, and he tries to be chivalrous with protecting her on her way home, and proving that he can kind of fight, but kind of sort of. He's not used to fighting guys, martial artists, but he kind of holds his own for a little while in that street fight. But we don't get that. We actually get a developing romance between our stuffy Van Helsing son and the sister of the fighter group, which surprised me on that.
Yeah, and then Van Buren. No,
I keep saying that too. I got you,
well,
Vanessa Buren. Yeah, but
Vanessa
it's just,
Buren. We can call her Van Buren as an abbreviation.
yeah.
I think that's fair.
I think that, yeah, Buren is, but Madam Lady Buren, or Vanessa
Well, she is
Buren.
Vanessa Buren.
Vanessa. There you go.
But she falls for one of the brothers. Is it
Mhm.
Ching? I think.
Yeah, the guy who fights barehanded. I mean,
Yeah. So there's sort of this cross, pollination of character groups, which, yeah, again, I thought was really, fascinating because it was character based and unexpected.
mhm.
Again, you get Van Helsing Jr. and Buren in the beginning. You think they're going to end up together, not only for a story reason, but just because this is the attractive male lead and this is the attractive female lead.
Yeah.
Peter Cushing is ostensibly the male lead, but it's very obvious in this film they're trying to say, yeah, he's also 74.
he's traveled this road a few times. He's good. He's good.
Yeah.
he's good to be just being the escort, and the expert. So.
But no, I agree, and I think that's why the climax knocked me out so much.
Mhm.
The vampire versus the family showdown, and a lot of these characters get horribly killed.
Yes.
Valiantly, but I mean, Vanessa gets attacked by a vampire.
Oh man.
And Van Helsing is kind of across the way, and he sees it happen. He's kind of helpless to do it because he's getting attacked, and he's waving around a giant torch. She gets bitten on the neck, and then Ching comes over, It's the quickest vampire transformation I've ever seen on film.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about within seconds of her getting bit, Ching comes over and he's like, "Are you okay?" And she like attacks him. He rams her through a pipe or whatever that's sticking up out
bamboo
of the...
stick. Yeah.
Oh, is that a bamboo stick?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's carved bamboo because they put the spikes out to try
right.
to, because the vampires, Dracula in his Chinese form has control over the undead and rings a bong, not a dong, rings a bong,
rings a bong,
rings a gong. Whew, it has been a week, folks. Sorry, it's only Tuesday. He rings a gong and raises an army of undead, and they come in and help the vampires. And so, yeah, that's why they set up these defenses. But yeah, he gets bit, and okay, Helsing, he yells across the yard. He's like, "You gotta kill her, dude!"
Right, and he does. And then she transforms back into her regular self. We get to see the bite wounds kind of disappear, and he's like, I love this woman. I can't live without her. So he impales himself on top of her.
Yeah.
So it's that shish kebab thing. It's like, wow. And then we get to see him slowly die, because it's not like an instantaneous thing. You actually see him, like, the thing goes to the back, and like the sound is just like horrible, and then he kind of like the blood drips out of his mouth, and then he kind of like collapses, and then he collapses again. You see his eyes go dead. It's like, it's so tragic.
It is tragic, and there's a number of scenes in here that are just directed really well like that. I mean, in a film, you got, okay, exploitation, women getting their tops off, okay, martial arts fighting, and then you get moments like this, and you're like, wait, what? It's like, wow, that was a solid moment. But these two characters, that's what surprised me as well, is the characters between Ching and Buren. That relationship and that romance budding was also something kind of unexpected, the way they played that, because you almost would expect some of the conversations she had with him would have with Van Helsing normally, not in a light, but they're talking about the budding romance between these two, and they have their own budding romance though. And that was a surprise, a pleasant surprise. I was like, wow. And they took that approach with these characters just to set up this tragic moment. And that was the thing too, of who died at the end of this family was unexpected, of who actually lived and died. But if you've seen Seven Samurai, this film like fast forwards to the end of Seven Samurai, especially when I realized, okay, how many family members? Oh, they're going to a village. Oh, they're setting up the fences, teaching the village. Oh, they've got a raiders coming. This feels very familiar to me. Not complaining that it does, but just at the same time, I'm like, okay, this is the part I've seen before.
Now, confession time. I've never seen Seven Samurai. I did see the remake of The Magnificent Seven with Chris Pratt and I think Ethan Hawke or some fucking buddy a few years ago, and that was pretty fun. That's a gap I need to fill in my movie library.
Well, first you need to see the original Magnificent Seven, and then you need to see Seven Samurai. Now, to prepare yourself with Seven Samurai, my oldest son wanted to watch it because he's a big Magnificent Seven fan. So we watched Magnificent Seven, the original, before we saw the remake. We watched the original because he was going through a Western phase. And I was like, well, this is based off of this. And he's like, oh, really? And he sat down with me through the 4-hour film or 3-hour film of Seven
Magnificent
Samurai.
Seven?
No, Seven.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Though Magnificent Seven is long, but he sat through the whole film with me with Seven Samurai, and he liked it. He enjoyed it, even though there is a lot of slow bits in it. But this has a lot of those beats. You can tell they were kind of going for a little bit of that angle with the defense of the town and such, and it had a very similar beats to it. Very quick, put more accelerated, but still it had kind of those beats. when they get to the village battle, which was a fun, again, the action sequences I do enjoy because I've always liked martial arts films, Chinese and Japanese martial arts films, because it's where I wish American cinema would directors would handle their action scenes a lot more. And some of them do, but most of them still haven't, even in today, to where they feel like fights. You know what I mean? They don't feel like, okay, one guy's waiting for the next. I mean, like in this one, you've got the single siblings taking on multiple guys who are attacking them all at once, and they're dodging and they're anticipating and using some spidey sense to get around. And that's exciting. It feels like this all-out brawl.
Mm-hmm.
And and each fight sequence in this, it's like that. It's not, there's very few tete-on-tete scenes in here except till the very end, but otherwise all the fights with our good guys fighting the bad guys are going against multiple partners. Even Van Helsing gets into it. Seeing Peter Cushing getting into the action the best he can by waving around a flaming torch, he's still pretty spry, I think, in this film.
Yeah, and that's from the late 50s up until the 70s. I mean, all these movies he appeared in, he always showed up for them. And
yeah,
you watch any of these movies, like, wow, this is his first time playing this character. He's really going for it. Oh no, this is the fifth time he's played this character. Wow.
But I always love watching Cushing on screen, and to see him in a film like this is interesting, surreal, and fun though, because he's not checking out on this. You can tell he's still the old school actor. Whatever role he's in, he's gonna act. He's not gonna just go through the motions, and he's not in this. I mean, he's still Van Helsing in this. He's the Van Helsing you've seen in the other Hammer films. I think he's still that very cool guy who, if I'm going against vampires, I want this guy in my corner.
Yeah.
Even if he makes mistakes. But yeah, we get an epic battle scene that's similar to Seven Samurai, especially with how many people die and live in some brutal deaths. The barehanded guy, seeing him go out like that, because I figured he was going to survive to the end, seeing him sacrifice himself, because I wasn't sure if he got actually bit by her or not. It's kind of implied because she had blood on her fangs, but I don't think it would have mattered either way. It seemed like he would have sacrificed himself either way on that bamboo shoot. But I didn't expect him to die, because he has one of the best kills in this movie, folks. And it's very simple, but it's really badass. That early street fight scene we talk about, he literally takes his fingers, buries them into the throat of this guy in the jugular, and then when he releases it, he wipes his fingers on the dying guy's lapel. I'm like, that's savage right there.
Yeah, I think that people who wrote Roadhouse were big fans of this movie. that was an epic throat rip.
It was an epic throat rip. It really was. But yeah, this just amalgamation of styles. For me, it worked. And you're right, especially this last 5 minutes that they have in here, because you go from taking on the Chinese vampires to where there's one left, and they dispatch him in a wonderful segment where he gets stabbed with the spear because he kidnapped the sister. Because these vampires are very driven, regardless of what's going on. One of them is going to make it back to the temple to put the girl on the sacrificial table. Fine, no one else, fine, I'm going to go back. So he steals the sister, takes her back, tries to tie her down, and he gets the old silver spear through the back, and he falls into this bubbling pot of blood, and this wonderful melt sequence. They do a lot of dissolves in this film, not a bad way, but I thought that was cool, the whole bubbling in the pot thing and how it kind of dissolved.
Yeah, that was cool. I think the ultimate, like when Dracula shows up and then gets dispatched, like that was, I don't know if that was the longest Dracula dissolve in the history of these pictures, but I mean, it took so long. I started checking my watch. I'm like, Jesus Christ, is he gone yet?
It was because, yeah, Van Helsing. So they dispatch. You think they got rid of all 7 golden vampires finally, and it doesn't take Van Helsing long when he's talking to our priest who's been taken over by Dracula for him to realize it's Dracula. He's like, "Oh, you're Dracula. Show yourself, you bitch." Wouldn't it be great if Peter Cushing would have said that?
Instant 7-star movie for me. If that had happened.
Show me yourself, you bitch.
In fact, someone out there needs to do like a
dub
of just that scene, put up on YouTube. Tag us on it.
Dracula shows up and he starts slapping, Will Smithing treatment, Mr. Van Helsing, and sorry, I had to. And actually, it was really directed, well seen. The one thing I have to say, whether you were bored or not, I will say the scenes and the sequences that I thought were really well directed, as far as for a film like this goes, because Van Helsing gets in this fight, he gets knocked over a table, and you actually hear a clang. So he pulls out the spear just as Dracula lunges for him, and he stabs him in the heart. But it's not like he grabbed the spear out of nowhere. They actually have a sound in there where you hear that but he doesn't grab the spear right away. So, it's kind of a good set. It's like, oh, that's where the spear came from. It's not like he just pulled it out of somewhere, it's like out of his Van Helsing pocket or something.
Been funny if it had taken place in the same location as that previous fight, and he pulled the bamboo shoot out of the two people that impaled themselves.
But you're right. What I love about this really long dissolve with Dracula, because it's a very dramatic death of Dracula. I mean, I know it's Dracula and it's Van Helsing dispatching Dracula, but if you watched Hammer films, you knew this was coming. But so he's got the spear in him, and he falls on the table, and they start to do the dissolve of Dracula, crumbling. And then at one point, it's a beautiful scene, and Cushing's reaction is great. And I don't know if the director shot it, separately, or if at one point the spear, because so much of Dracula's body is dissolved, the spear actually falls and smashes Dracula's head. And they cut to Van Helsing, who goes, "Oh," he gets this legit like, "Ooh," like I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, it's a good dissolve.
It's a good dissolve.
They could have taken a few frames out of it, though.
It could have gone a little faster, but it was still a good dissolve. And that's the thing, is a lot of the effects and makeup effects for 74, lower budget. This is a lower budget film. They don't have a huge budget in this film. I liked what they did, the old school effects that they do in here with the dissolves, because the beginning of Dracula's dissolves great, because you've got the skull body there, and all of a sudden you watch and they cut away and they cut back, do the old school there, and you see the skin gets all gray, and then it's got this cool effect with his eyes to where they're hanging there, and all of a sudden one just goes and the other one goes into his skull.
They are like these weird, like cartoon eyes.
Well, yeah.
Well,
have you seen an eyeball out of its skull?
Not in person.
Not in person? No? Oh, I had to dissect a cow eye in biology class, so it looks kind of like that. Yeah. We dissected a lot of things in biology class.
I went to the wrong high school,
including the fetal pig. That was a little disturbing for some folks. Cow's heart was.
You just turned it into bacon, though.
You just not with all that formaldehyde in it. No.
Just make the stove hot enough, it dissolves then.
But I will say the eyeballs, they got fairly realistic. They do kind of look like that when they're ripped out of the body. I mean, not ripped, when they're taken out surgically perfectly out of the body and used for dissection. Anyway.
Sure.
Folks, this isn't a deep film, but it's a fun film, especially if you like all these elements. It's it's a unique film. There's not you don't get to see just two so different styles mashed together this in a film like that. I mean, just you can tell again whose part, but I think that's part of the appeal for me is this coming together of two styles that you would never have really thought of coming together. And for me, it worked. Maybe it is because of the ending, the epic extended fight battle, and the dispatching of Dracula and that. But overall, it somehow works.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I keep saying maybe I need to watch it again, but
well, you've watched it twice in a little over a year's span, so you don't have to watch it again if you don't want. I mean, for some people I could see, but for me, I guess having watched a lot of martial arts films, to see those Hammer elements inserted into it added a little bit more for it to me, So.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I appreciate the effort. I feel like if they had done like more of these kind of mashups, maybe they would have gotten it to the sort of the sweet spot where it satisfies the my need for Hammer as much as it does, perhaps your need for kung fu. I don't know.
No, it just.
And I'm not saying that disparagingly. I mean it, legitimately. It's just this. I like the idea, but the formula for me was just a bit off.
Sure. I mean, there is entertainment value though in here, especially for lovers of both. I think, and it's if nothing else, to see someone attempting to do something like this between two different studios, is fun for me, especially if you like cinema and classic cinema and the productions of both these, because I'm thinking back to the other Shaw brothers, which they're becoming a habit with us, the oily the oily maniac,
that is what this movie was missing.
An oily maniac.
They needed to have instead of bringing back Hal Holbrook with lipstick Dracula at the end, they should have just had the last guy turn into the oily maniac. That would have been amazing. Can you imagine Peter Cushing versus the oily maniac?
That would be great. Oh, you could do a total almost like Jack the Ripper type of angle with it, to where he's investigating, mysterious deaths of criminals and prostitutes and that. And it turns out to be the oily maniac, and Cushing plays the investigator trying to solve why these people are dying like this and covered in oil. And look, you got a whole nother movie right there.
This is the reason we need to invent time travel to make that possible.
We need to go back and go to the Shaw brothers and go, hey, you know how to do another collaboration with the Hammer horror. You should do this. Bring back the oily maniac, but have him be like Jack the Ripper and have Cushing investigate on the streets of, wherever.
You can call it the Oily Peter.
No, that's a different movie.
Yeah.
That's a completely different. That's
I'd watch that too.
I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, it's got some interesting locations. This film is what it is, and I found a lot of charm in it. It moves at a quick pace, like we mentioned. It doesn't have a huge runtime, so even if you do have the parts where it is more talky, it doesn't take too long to get to another fight. It takes a little while, but not that long. Especially near the end, it ramps up more, because as we get the vampires, we get closer to the vampires. There's 3 vampires in this wonderful cave fight with the vampires as well. Best part of that scene is when Van Helsing tells the guy who's killing people with his bare hands, he goes, go for their hearts. And he's like, oh, and he starts putting his hands through through the zombie army's chests. He's just like, bah! And then the first time he does it, he brings his hand out, it's just covered in dust. He's
powder. Yeah.
He's like, oh, okay. And he just starts. And that's what I like too about it, is that there's some humor worked into it as well. I didn't look up any trivia in this, so I'm not sure how much input Hammer productions had with the the elements, who had more say over the movie, or if, I almost thought this was going to be one of those where Hammer got the rights to, some scenes or a film about vampires, and then they would intersperse, you know what I mean? We've seen that though, where they found footage from a film that wasn't fully released, so someone else bought the rights to it, and they edit like someone giving a lecture or flashbacks, and then all the flashbacks are from the original intended film, and it, so I almost thought it was going to be like that until I started watching them, going, oh no, this is an actual co-production. And yeah, your final thought with it, Ian. Would you recommend this to either a Shaw Brothers or Hammer fan?
Well, it sounds like I could definitely recommend this to a Shaw Brothers fan, because you were knocked out by it. As far as a Hammer fan, yes, with some caveats, because it is very different than a lot of the other Hammer Dracula movies. But yeah, go in with an open mind. If you're a fan of Hammer and the Shaw Brothers movies, this might be right up your alley. But for me, I'm only familiar with the one, half of that genre equation, so it didn't quite do it for me, except in the 0 hour, which I think made up for a lot.
Yeah, the final battle for sure. Especially if any misgivings you had during the film, the final thing is just tight. The final battle is everything it had promised. They built up to. You got to go fight the fight, and sure enough, you've got the expert good guys, you've got the evil bad guys with the undead army, and it's a fight. I mean, there's a lot going on in that last act where they finally take on the golden vampires, the ones that are left, and yeah, it does pay off. So it does make the trip worthwhile for me. Yeah, if you're a kung fu martial arts film fan and a Hammer fan, or I would recommend it. If you're a Peter Cushing fan, it's great to see him in something just a little bit different than what you might be used to seeing him in, because he still brings it. It's like, in fact, I think if it wasn't for Cushing, he elevates almost every film that I've ever watched him in, and just having him on screen presence in that, it seems like it affects everyone else around him, and he's just one of those actors.
Oh yeah, this does not work if we're saddled with just the adventures of Leyland Van Helsing, his son.
Yeah, his son, which I was worried about too. Is when they introduced his son, I'm like, oh, this is where Peter Cushing is. You go ahead. I can't make the trip. You know what I mean? I thought they were going to kind of play that trope, but they don't. No, he's fucking Van Helsing. He's going to go check out some Chinese vampires. It's like, I ain't sitting on the sideline for my son who doesn't know squat about vampires. I've killed Dracula at least 5 different times. But yeah, I if it was just his son, no, but he really helps. Peter Cushing, with his talent, helps bring these two completely different styles together to where you can buy into it, at least for the film. It feels like a solid story. It's just, you can tell the different sections, but he helps keep the film tied together, I think, keep it coalesced.
Yeah.
Just for his presence there, but also his acting with his dialogue and his interaction with others. And he's having a good time. You can tell Peter's enjoying doing this film. It's not like he's, oh, they assigned me to this. He seems at least legitimately like he's into this movie,
Yeah. He's not like Christopher Lee in some of the Dracula pictures that he...
Yeah. You want me to do what? Do I have to speak? Can I just stand there and go? Can I just do that? Here, put the little blood there. There you go. Yeah, that's great, Chris. Yeah, you're great. You're good. So yeah, there you have it, folks. The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. I'm glad I put this on the list. Not only did I want to visit a film that had the original Slayer in it, but this just seemed too weird not to try to cover, and I'm glad we watched it. I would recommend it. It's fun. You're looking for, and it's one that you don't have to think too hard. You can just sit back, relax, see it with a group of friends who might like these type of films as well. I think it'd be far more enjoyable that way. But Yeah, there you have it, folks. An entertaining film, if anything, and it does pay off at that end. So, thank you so much for listening to us talk about this film as well as many other aspects of culture around this film. uh, yeah. Any final words there, Ian, before we give you your license to shill?
No, I think we've pretty much said it all. I am glad that I got to revisit it, even though I just kind of listened to it. I much like the first conversation I had about this, I enjoyed the conversation more than the process of watching the movie itself.
Sure. I can see that. I could see that. But this just made me want to watch more of the martial arts films in my library again, though, because watching it, I forget. You get when you have to review a lot of films, you're watching a lot of films for review screeners or whatnot and other things, and you do get to watch some films occasionally for fun, but then you get to revisit some films like this from a specific genre that you loved younger, that you kind of forgot that you loved until you watch one of them again. And I'm like, oh man, I gotta pop in my Return to the 36th Chamber. I gotta pop in my, just the whole list suddenly comes back going, I gotta start watching some more martial arts films again, because the old school ones, because there's something to watch, and their action scenes in there, the way they're directed. Yeah, America films occasionally get that style, but not nearly as much as what you get out of especially cinema overseas. So and there you have it, folks. I'm done rambling now. This is where I give my wonderful patient co-host the license to shill. So please, Ian, shill away, sir.
Well, I'm Ian Simmons. You can find me at Kicking the Seat at kickseat.com. I also have a YouTube channel. Look up Kicking the Seat on YouTube. Do movie reviews, interviews, roundtables, such as the Wednesday Night Live series we're doing, which we're talking about Moon Knight, the Disney Plus Marvel series, every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Central. So come check it out. Hang out. Mark's usually hanging out with us there, talking about Marvel stuff. And, as the DC shill, he brings some balance to the force, as it were. Although I feel like I'm much more on the DC shill side with this series, because it is so far failed to impress.
I'm actually kind of with you there. I'm loving the Ethan Hawke character, but I'm still not quite feeling it with the title character.
Well, spoiler alert, that collection, the graphic novel collection I held up last week, and everyone's saying, oh yeah, this series is based on that. I finished reading it today, and even though it starts strong, I feel like the last 150 pages were a complete waste of time.
Wow.
So I hope it's not as closely adapted as people are saying it was.
Maybe they're taking the reverse approach with the TV series. Who knows? But
so they're starting off as a complete waste of time, and in the last 10 minutes, it's going to be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So yes, folks, check out Ian's stuff. Fantastic things. He foolish enough to have me on his show. Last week we even talked Morbius, which wasn't nearly the hate fest that he thought it might be.
Totally surprised, and honestly a little disappointed.
Oh, sorry. Even I failed to bring all the hate, but I'm usually not like that, except a couple films, which we won't talk about. But I will just shill not only our stuff, specialmarkproductions.com, once you're done listening to all my wonderful crew members, other content, you can come over and check it out there. But if you're a filmmaker, you'll hear me talk about it every week now. I will still be pushing it, because submissions are still open for at least 6 weeks yet for the Sawdust City Fright Fest. If you're a horror film maker, especially in the Midwest, and you're looking to submit to a film festival, do it now. It's the submission fees are very low. Happens second weekend in October in beautiful Oshkosh, Wisconsin, at the Historic Time Community Theater. That is where I first met Mr. Ian Simmons there. Lots of great stuff happens at those small film festivals, folks. And so, yeah, if you're a horror filmmaker, go ahead and submit. It's out on Film Freeway. So there you have it. Thank you so much for listening to us. Now we'll just say a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. I want
a little bit of Borat in there with your Dracula.
Borat Dracula. No, that's not something I want to see.